I'm going to share a story from my own classroom that I've done. So prior to being director of learning or director of teaching for transformation for CASE, I'm actually, the other hat I wear is I'm a K through 12 director of learning at Surrey Christian School. And you're going to meet another one of my colleagues in the next story. And we're located north of the American border, just in a suburb of Vancouver. And so my story comes from a junior biology class, 11th grade biology. And I was in church, and our children's pastor had called all the children to the front. It's always a good moment of chaos. You know that moment well. And she proceeded to pull out this book called The Curious Garden. And maybe you're like me, maybe you're also a sucker for a good picture book. And she began reading this story about the Curious Garden. The very first page, you see it's a big spread. So there once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. And then we go on to meet this curious gardener. And I had taught this Biology 11 course many years. I've taught this course probably going back 15 years. And there's a lot of stuff in it. We basically go from viruses, which is actually a great topic for the last year and a half, all the way up to chimpanzees. And you got about 4.5 months to cover all of that. And we're going to ignore humans because that's grade 12 biology. So there is just a lot of stuff. And the course really feels like on your mark, get set, go. And I was just looking to reframe this. So when this story was presented to me at church, I turned around and I walked into class, and these students had never had me as a teacher before, and I invited them to, hey, get out of here. I did attendance, got to do school first, and then we'll do learning. Follow me. And I just walked out the door, and these students, because they're compliant, also followed me and walked out the door, and we found ourselves in a little stand of trees outside the school, and invited them into a circle, and I read the book cover to cover, just like I was modeled to do this in kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2, and I did the same. And then we read it again, and then we read it again. We read it 3 times. And at that point, I used this to launch into the deep hope for this course. And I shared with them, listen, my deep hope here is that we will desire to become curious gardeners within this curious garden. So it's not going to be about covering material from viruses to chimpanzees, but we'll do that. But it's why do we need to learn about this stuff? And I wanted to really impress upon them that actually we live within this garden. It's not just a garden, it's a curious garden. And we get to be curious gardeners within it. I wanted them to desire to become these people. That was my deep hope, not because we're compliant, not because I'm going to get a grade, not just to actually desire to become these people. And so the second facet of my deep hope is that in the becoming of these peoples, we would become co-creators with God in the restoration or the restoration of this garden. And perhaps you can hear the echo of the story, the grand narrative that we're part of, that God has created all things, and it is good and it is delightful, but there is brokenness. But because of the work on the cross, we are invited in the making of all things new again. And what if this course was our opportunity to play our part in that story, in the making of all things new, in the restoration, the restoration of this garden. So the storyline, as we saw with Cole, that comes out of this deep hope, and there's usually this strong connection, was this curious garden, that we're just going to frame this course, this content, as our dive into the curious garden. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff. We have so many life cycles to cover in this course that we may forget that this is a curious garden. And we may forget that we're to be curious gardeners within it. And these life cycles can help us, but they may actually stand in the way of us desiring to be these people. So how are we going to desire to be these curious gardeners? And we'll engage the life cycles, but it won't be our starting point. And so that's the function of the storyline, was the curious garden, the curious garden, the curious garden. My deep hope, desire to be these people, desire to be these people. And we put, just like you saw in Cole's visuals, we put this language like loud and prominent in the classroom. And again, it's not necessarily, I think we associate it more with elementary practice and secondary practices, right? We don't, oh, bulletin board, we don't do bulletin boards, we maybe a poster, but it's not a bulletin board, it's a storyboard. And we put this language aloud to remind us as teachers why we're here. And the deep hope sits large, that we desire to become these people. And so when we plan, this language of the curious garden just stayed in front of me. Like, if we're going to engage this content, which we will, we need to do it in such a way that's going to lead to us desiring to be a certain type of person. And so the through lines, again, help give, to me, a visual and also a language about the type of people that we would like to become. And so the three through lines that really jumped out and drove the design of this course was one, creation enjoying. And the language around that is that learners, our students, myself, will delight in God's qualities, eternal power, and divine nature through what he has created. So I'd like our students to be these people, to practice being these creation enjoyers. And the next one was order discovering, that through this course, we were also going to have opportunity to be order discoverers. And learners, my students and myself, will seek and find God's fingerprints in the intricate and purposeful design of what he created. So there's like delight and seek. So designing these learning experiences so that our students will practice these ways of being. And the last one, like Joel mentioned, but from a different angle, is actually justice seeking. And so the language we use to describe justice seeking is learners pursue restorative transformation, seeking to bring wholeness where there is brokenness. And like we find this in human relationships and relationship with self, with others. We also find this in a relationship with us and creation, between us and creation. So I wanted to invite our students into practice justice seeking as they were learning about this curious garden, as they're becoming these curious gardeners. And so from James K.A. Smith, from Imagining the Kingdom, he speaks of practicing. And he says, what appears to be micro practices have macro effects. What might appear to be micro habits are in fact disciplinary formations that begin to reconfigure our relation to the wider world. All that to say, I wanted our students to practice justice seeking, order discovering, creation enjoying, and in the doing of that, they will be shaped, they will be formed. The practices aren't just something we do, they do something to us. So then how do we do this in this course? Then again, I'm just like outlining all the design elements. So then we needed to practice this, that couldn't just be flipping a textbook every day, that we just couldn't do that. It's not going to get to us to the practicing and the desiring. So through a couple failed attempts, I finally landed at this hatchery, which is a couple miles down the road from our school. And I asked them, like, do you feel like, and it's run by a group of volunteers, right? So they have tons to do. I was like, can you imagine any way in which a group of 11th graders could actually make your life easier? And at first they were like, no, we can't really imagine that way. And then they brainstormed a little bit more about their needs. And we always we kind of start there. Well, what do you need? Because if we can get you where you in your needs, then we might be helpful. And then there's a real reason for us to show up, and you'll be happy when we show up because we're actually getting needs met. And so they needed a website. Well, that's not the Biology 11 curriculum. The good news is I was able to go back to our school and tell our computer studies teacher that, hey, I know someone who needs a website. And that was the birthing of their Flex for their computers class. They now build websites for community organizations. And they got back to me and they did identify a bunch of stuff that they needed to be done. So our students are going to have an opportunity to practice creation enjoying, order discovering, justice seeking, meeting their needs, while also mastering the content of the course. And that's kind of the secret sauce there. We couldn't do the course over here and then go do our work with the hatchery over here. They needed to be together. So it became our students coming down once a week, getting to meet, we called them the other curious gardeners, because we adopted this language that we're curious gardeners. There's other curious gardeners out there. Let's go spend time with them. And the meeting of these curious gardeners and understanding what the hatchery did and the work that they did was just inviting and nurturing, ultimately empowering our students into their story and into the role that they can play within God's story that the hatchery is part of. And so in the beginning, it was simply building a relationship and going. And I told the students, like, listen, because we had to travel off site, like, our class time's not enough time. We're going to need your lunch time, or we're going to need a little time after school. And I spent quite a few noon hours in the beginning chasing down students, getting them onto our little minibus so we could go down. It didn't come natural to them, obviously, right away. What? We're going to lose my noon hour? No, that's not going to happen. So we had to work on that. But we kept going down. We kept being invited into meaningful work. They got to know the hatchery, got to know the people. They got to know the tine head, which rolls through the hatchery, that the hatchery is based on. They got to really come to know the riparian zone and come to know all the species and the relationships. And in all of this, they saw that their work began to matter. And my favorite day of the whole year was one of those days where I was chasing kids down at lunch, and it was just pouring rain. Okay, Pacific Northwest, pouring rain, cold November day, just pouring rain. And I couldn't get enough of the kids for a critical mass. And I just said to the group that was there, I just said, hey, listen, I'm going to call up the hatchery, let them know we can't come today. We're not heading down. And the one said, Mr. DeBoer, are you crazy? I have this to do, and we got to do this, and we wait here. And the student went and had all the students there within a minute, and we were on our way. After that, I never chased kids again, because the work was meaningful. The relationships mattered. They were desiring to do this work and learn the stuff they needed. And we eventually went from meeting the needs of the volunteers to the riparian zone, the stream itself, to the other groups that were coming. And our students took on ownership that when other class groups come, we would give the tours and we would tell them about the work. And they just became more and more empowered that their work mattered. And then always ensuring there was time to simply be within this area. And the stuff from the virus, we didn't have chimpanzees, but we had other mammals. The content was there. We needed to discover it. And the students they'd be so, Mr. DeBoer, if we get our work done really fast, do you think we can just go for a hike today? In my head, I'm like, this is the real work, but absolutely, let's get our work done really fast. And this is, the practicing was the shaping. So it's just as I wrap up the story here, some listening to the students. Yeah, you can read. I'll just sit here in silence, let you read this on your own. What I love about that second quote is the students inviting his brother into this story. And again, as a science teacher who cares about content, I'm pleased to read these reflections from my students, because, okay, they're getting the content as well. It's not, right, even though, hey, we're just going to, Mr. DeBoer, we're going to trick Mr. DeBoer, we're going to hike around today. They're getting the content. The echoes of order discovering within this quote. And I love as a student self-identifies becoming the smart aleck in my family. I'm the smart aleck in my family. I've started to point out the species of animals or what kind of phylum a plant belongs to. And again, reassuring my teacher self that they are getting this stuff while they're being shaped in this way. And this, if you had known this student, he's never been classified by school before as the smart aleck. You can just hear the pride in that. I want to be aware of the world God has made for me and everyone else. And I want to take the time to get to know the creation and in turn, get to know my God. And finally, one last quote, and I know I said it's from viruses to chimpanzees, and this student speaks a little bit beyond that. And I love that they're being shaped in such a way that feeling that hope. And for me, from my own experience within this, there's a lovely page towards the end of the picture book. But the most surprising thing that popped up were the new gardeners. And that too came true within our class, the popping up of gardeners who were desiring to be these people. And the book ends with the greening of this city, which started as brown, if you recall. A couple of just final reflections as I bring my story to a close. Deep hope, right? My deep hope in pen, your path in pencil. I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'm not sure. There's many parts where I don't yet know. And Cole spoke to that too. He has his deep hope, not sure where it's going to go yet this year. But writing your deep hope in pen, because that doesn't change. The idea of practicing, providing opportunities for students to practice a way of being so that it shapes them in such a way that is consistent with your deep hope. And then finally, it was invigorating for me. It was more work for me, but I had taken this course that I taught 1,000 times, too dramatic. I taught many times, and it brought new life to it, and then started to shape me in a way that I also wanted to become shaped.